Alfonso Byrne, a retired investigator in his 50s. He had no wife or kids because of his job. Seeing too many families at funerals or divorce courts always turned his stomach in all ways imaginable. So he avoided all that stuff. Now in his old age, he somewhat regrets it, but it's too late now, especially now that the world has gone to hell in a handbasket. His life, just like his youth, was over when he moved to Bedford Falls, in a rat-infested condo that he was probably paying too much for. Reading the newspaper was his favorite pastime. Well, actually, he just liked looking at the funnies. What else could he say? He liked the classic humor the best. It was his only pastime. He couldn't really afford anything else besides the occasional comic book and a word puzzle here and there. He didn't leave his house much. There's only so much you can do on a trash pension. He and the other investigators got snubbed on pension. It was in the news and everything. Nothing came of it though, being stuck in courts and all. He only left his house to get more smokes, groceries, or more reading materials. Not that he was an avid reader. On the contrary, Alfonso was as slow as molasses on a cold winter's day when it came to reading. He decided to get better at it after he retired. His doc said it would be good for him, though he never took it too seriously. He mostly watched TV if he wasn't reading the funnies. The news and detective shows were all he binged. Every day, the world was getting worse and worse. He never thought he would see the day that it would reach his county, or let alone his town. Sure enough, it reached his front door. He got together all the things that he could, his old rucksack, some weapons and supplies, and then he was off, through a window, to his neighbor's house. It's been a long time since the days where he had to crawl through windows and sneak around corners, and actually hurt people, or what's left of them. Back in the 80s, Alfonso disguised himself as part of one of the notorious gangs, the Iron Rodents. A vicious gang back in the day that stalked the dark corners of Louisville. He had to do things you'll never forget, but in the end, he got the guy. The big boss, two-timing Sammy. That bastard would stalk women and murder them all around Louisville. Alfonso was in the news for weeks after the arrest. It was one of Alfonso's greatest cases, but that was well behind him, and it didn't stop the Iron Rodents from continuing neither. He didn't know his neighbors too well, not that he wanted to in the first place. All of his neighbors were young, full of piss and vinegar, but mostly stupidity and daddy's money. After all, this town wasn't for him. It was for the young, and he wasn't like that anymore. He was old enough to be their dad. Alfonso was sure he'd rather relive the days of being shot at by crooks than be their actual dad. He moved to this new upcoming town to escape Louisville, to get as far away as he could. He had to sell his car too, but he didn't mind. He needed the cash, anyways. He wasn't ashamed of using some of it for bus fare either. His only goal now was to survive until he could think of another plan. After all this caught him off guard. Why weren't there any people left? They couldn't have spread so fast that not even Uncle Sam could at least warn the people of Kentucky that the mess had reached us. What was happening? Alfonso didn't know, but he didn't like this. He didn't like this one bit. Alfonso decided to search the houses for people and supplies. He couldn't be the only one left, right? He couldn't be the only one. There had to be people somewhere. They must be scared out of their minds, just like he was. Being the only one left unnerved him, to say the least. Shook him to his very core. Decades of training and field work could never prepare him for this day. The smell of sickly sweet death lingered in his nostrils, searing them numb, until the new smells he couldn't imagine burned and sunk their way into his repressed memories. The smell of wet, rotting flesh, like it was a flood of decay rushing all around him at once, swallowing him whole. Images of rainy days and dark, murky bathwater wriggled back into the front of his mind. God help me, he mumbled, massaging his temples and wrinkling his crooked nose. He felt no remorse for the dead then and now. It would be hard to explain the smell away from any of these shambling corpses. Anyone who thought these things were still people never saw the things lurking under and around street corners, let alone know what it's like to see death herself. Alfonso knew. He knew all too well the darker side of Kentucky. Sure, it wasn't as bad as other places, but when you work in a city for long enough, you see the shadows coming off of every light. The shadows of the past, or the looming presence of the future, always surrounded good people. House after house, he searched for survivors, but it was a fruitless endeavor. He couldn't find anyone, though he did come across a warehouse full of useful tools. He did miss his snub-nosed pistol the Force gave him a long time ago, and he hated even more that the fact that on a drunken bender, he pawned it off to some cheap, sleazy shop owner sometime after retirement. He hoped the old girl was in excellent hands, but it was unlikely. Soon he came across a bar, generic in name, but a perfect place for someone like himself to set up shop for a while and think about what to do in this now god-forsaken town. To be frank, Alfonso wasn't very familiar with this place. He had only recently moved from Louisville. After years of living in a deadbeat apartments there, his rat den condo was an upgrade would be an understatement. He started to mark things down where things were on the map that he kept with him on his journey in hell. After securing that dingy dive bar, Alfonso set out again, but this time in search for supplies. He could look all he wanted for people, but if he starved to death, then he's sure no one would look for him, or really even care. After all, he was good at finding people. It was his job for decades, after all. Find people or evidence and arrest them. Simple as that. Then when looking through one of the houses, then boom, his first sign that people were around. Boarded up windows to this building next to the bar. Alfonso searched every nook and cranny trying to find something to lead to the whereabouts of the persons who bunked up in this place. The smell of a corpse, a fresh one at that, on the floor of the small kitchen. Checking the body, there was nothing substantial but a house key. They appeared to be done in by the blood loss from the lacerations and bite marks. Pieces of amateur medical supplies like band-aids, rip sheets, and a bent needle sprawled across the floor of the kitchen. All useless. Checking the other rooms, one of the rooms has a moving corpse in it. Appeared to be the perpetrator that caused the death of the survivor. This corpse must have started moving or turned into a monster and they caught the poor bastard off guard. That's all she wrote, sad to say. After clearing this would-be base, Alfonso stripped the place clean of all weapons, ammo, and food the bastard hoarded. That was basically the end of the first few hours in hell. The strange thing is that got Alfonso wondering, why were there so few moving corpses, and even fewer bodies of survivors? What happened to the population of Bedford Falls? Maybe he would find the answers to them. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would die an inglorious death somewhere on the street, or even in his own base. He didn't know for sure, but he hoped to God it wasn't either of them. Hey, thanks for watching the first episode of Alfonso Byrne, the retired detective. This took 3 hours to record and cut. I'm not too sure if I'm going to add any music to it or not, so hope you liked it. Honestly, I didn't know what to do with this character, but I just so happened to be listening to some jazz and came up with this LA noir thing. While playing, it was nothing like that. Honestly, I was just playing just to play. He was getting very boring, very fast, and I didn't know what else to do, because he didn't have a direction or a story. But now that he does, I hope to find like an end goal for him, and play more like a detective instead of just kind of running around doing whatever. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Good day, good night, and remember, don't go fuck yourself. Alright, see you later, guys.